I'm not certain if this was merely my subjective perception of time, or some kind of omniversal temporal effect, but Nkani moved too slow and missed the sword strike, and so did the avatar of Cain, which appeared a second later. I couldn't let a small failure stop us anyways. Polaris Albedalac teleported above the battlefield and fired its wide-range death pulse, moving slightly faster with the Demonifuge powering its psychic systems. But Nurgle simply took a small step back, only that step transformed into 100 kilometers of distance, making the psi weapon miss. A black glowing Catan appeared right beside the Chaos God and sliced with a phase scythe right into the creature's leg, cutting a tendon perhaps. The shitty grin on the Chaos God's face vanished, and a warp wave struck the ghostly Nightbringer, shattering the Catan shard into 1,000 smaller bits of floating scrolls and black letters. I began preparing my black lament to fire, when an alien hand tapped my shoulder. "Not yet. You'll only draw attention to yourself," the Harlequin whispered in a barely audible voice. Right. We did have a plan to follow, even if things went wrong here. I focused my mind and deployed the last remaining orcs behind Nurgle, right as the broken Catan were sucked back into the Tesseract vault and 1,000 Biotitans replaced them in a concave arc centered on the target. Zoanthropes, Maleceptors, Trigons and Tyrants attacked Nurgle with psionic spells and focused silence, even while thousands of plagues and diseases spread on the battlefield. Nurgle summoned his own reinforcements, demons and plague bearers, then demon princes and greater demons, while my sneaky orcs howled in joy and rushed inside the mansion to loot and pillage. Nobody likes to see their home burned and looted, not even a Chaos God. His attention slipped, and he turned to deal with the annoying greenskins, his warp portals opening all over the mansion to produce more plague marines, demon engines and diseased cultists. That second was enough, as the Psi Titan had a clear shot and fired the Sinistrum beam right at the damaged knee, blowing it off completely, while the Eldar avatars also struck with their godly weapons. "I'm getting angry," the Empyrean godling yelled in annoyance, just as the sky split open to reveal a giant orc with 2 heads, falling feet first. Nurgle shifted to the side, barely dodging the crashing ogre. "I am Gork." "And I am Mork," the other head proclaimed in fairly decent low Gothic. "And we have come to collect all the shinnies," the first head explained while chopping with a familiar axe called Gorechild. "My gift and bribe for their help, if that wasn't clear." The dragon teeth on the blade sliced open the jolly belly of the Chaos God, only there weren't gems and gold inside, like the orc gods were promised. For a pair of godlike creatures, they were quite the idiots, to be correct. I simply assumed they'd act like a bigger and badder orc boss, greedy and violent, and to nobody's surprise they did. While the police drama took place on the steps of the mansion, our fleet kept moving forward, while 1,000 hive fleets were being deployed behind and to the sides. Of course, the vast majority of these Tyranids were not mind-controlled, only certain valuable specimens with powerful synaptic links gaining the honor of receiving Necron mind shackles. They did their job anyways, as the Tyranids were simply supposed to attack and devour everything they encountered. Mostly demons. If they died, it wasn't a problem, quite the contrary. As the Black Lament passed over the battling gods, I sacrificed a crate of gems and gold and dispersed those over Nurgle's wounds. I know, I was being petty, but I also didn't want those overpowered idiots after my head. Better give them a bigger target. "Look. He really bleeds gems and gold," Gork shouted and kicked Nurgle away to grab the shinnies. "I want the blue ones," Mork demanded and slapped his other head in envy. I sighed inward as Nurgle just watched the orc gods bicker over his blood and gems, then biting on the gold to make sure it was real. His wounds were already regenerating visibly, by the time our fleet crossed into the next layer. "You were mean," the Inquisitor commented as she unleashed a barrage of melter bombs and promethium canisters behind us to create a wall of flames and screaming traitor marines being burned alive, yet unable to die. I just shrugged at her hypocrisy and fired a single-second blast towards Nurgle just before the Tyranid silence crashed over the mansion layer and that space crumpled into confetti and plague spores. The beam didn't do much, barely flaying a layer of skin from the Chaos God, but now I had something to measure against its total apparent mass. About 1 in 1,000 the necessary damage, not that Nurgle would stay still and allow me to fire for 20 minutes. The mask underscore of underscore the underscore frozen underscore stars is already picking the lock around Aisha. If you're looking for valuables to steal, now it's the time, Namorak whispered from behind my chair, just as I let out a tired sigh. I knew the plan, but this was the warp and I couldn't expect everything to go as planned. Already things were going badly, as the orc gods were too stupid to focus a single minute on their task. I didn't actually hope that they'll be actually able to kill Nurgle, even if the thing was injured, but at least they could have tried. A single minute. Damn it. The fleet kept going, while our troops began to deploy and fortify as much as they could, blocking the mansion's corridors with ferrocrete and blackstone bunkers, setting up minefields and traps, and covering courtyards with flamer tanks and sentry turrets. We didn't have a whole minute, as Nurgulite reinforcements poured in through doors, halls and portals, and our big guns had to jump out to fight greater demons and plague titans. We did have 3.5 titan legions of our own, plus 9 night courts, and thousands of tanks. We could hold the enemy here, while the rescue took place. But only if Nurgle didn't show up in person. Even greater demons were functionally immune to most weapons, and titans were too slow to fight them on even grounds. If the plasma cannon missed, the titan was toast or melted. Shields and armor counted for too little here inside the garden, where reality was often a mere suggestion. Of course, there were other potential helpers that might arrive. The Hood were coming through the maelstrom, a giant migration of trillions with powers potentially equal to Nurgle himself. They might arrive in a minute, or in 1,000 years though. Traveling through the warp was uncertain like that. Xionch and his armies were supposed to attack Nurgle as well, but they weren't going to. Xionch would be too cautious to risk his life in direct combat. I didn't actually plan for the scheming god to actively help, but rumors of Trazin's deal with a certain chaos sorcerer were leaked. Nurgle had been forced to deploy most of his armies on his domain's border with the Architect of Fate, which did allow us a rather easy entry into his mansion. Suddenly, the mansion shook like a leaf in a storm, and the Necron ship just vanished, leaving us and the Eldar holding the idiot ball. Aisha was freed, but the Necron took her. Namorak observed in a slightly surprised voice. And that's why the mansion is crumbling? I asked while retrieving my troops into the Tesseract. No point fighting the lesser minions anymore. No. Mork is dead. The solitaire continued with his impossible knowledge. I blinked and urged the Black Lament to speed up and upwards. I'm not sure if that's good or bad. I mused while unleashing a barrage of Nova shells and Nova mines to cover the retreat. We changed course towards the Maelstrom, with our Geller fields burning through their consumable psychers 100 times the normal rate. The immaterium currents were shifting and changing like crazy, and this wasn't the best time to navigate. Only we didn't have much choice. We had to reach the Hood, or else. An Eldar cruiser changed course and dove right into the strongest warp current and vanished without a word. You saw that? I asked, a bit curious. Farseers are crazy. Then again, a crone sword is worth the risk anyway. The Harlequin explained in a careless voice. Seeing what Hinkani could do with its own sword, I had to agree. Those weapons were kinda nice. I want one too. I hummed in a longing voice. The solitaire laughed and patted my shoulder. You have enough enemies, human. Your emperor was wise to remove 100 targets from your back, but you keep wanting more. I sighed and scratched Canis on his wise head. Woof. The wolf proclaimed in a proud howl. Yeah, Canis, I know. You'll never be my enemy. Now we only had to find the damned Hood in a universe-size maze that kept shifting. So I just opened the hololith screen and poked it at random. The Black Lament took the lead, covering the combined fleet with its bulk and enormous Geller fields, and we sped onwards. I wasn't a navigator, but I trusted my luck anyways. The Black Lament shuddered again as our Geller fields bumped into something large and quite solid. Most likely another greater demon trying to slow us down. Warning messages flashed into the manifold circuit, and I mentally directed more Lamenters and Silent Sisters to plug the breaches or seal off damaged sections. It seemed like the entire warp was hounding us, or at least half of it. I doubted Xionch would act against us before Nurgle was dead, but that didn't exclude him pointing our location to our pursuers. I would have done the same in his place, and I wasn't even close to that godly level of backstabbing abilities. Do you even know where we are going? Lady Valane asked in a teasing tone, and leaned to pet Canis in a suicidal move. Really, everyone keeps petting the wolf engine as if it was a docile puppy or something. Canis was already more than a match for an Astartes dreadnought and possibly even an Imperial knight. I know, because I did train him to fight orc bosses or tyrannic warforms, and he only had problems with the larger biotitans. That way, I explained carelessly, while pointing towards our distant destination. Both Namorek and the Inquisitor snorted at my convincing navigation skills. Well, at least we're going somewhere. I'll inform Lord Segorak to prepare the trap, the Harlequin said in a shifty tone, as if preparing another prank. And no, having invisible water bubbles crashing on your head is not actually funny. And he could even detect Vadrax, as we did try to tie his shoes together, but failed. Perhaps I could glue his soles to the floor though. He wouldn't jump away to the ceiling, next time. Canis begged me with a suffering glance to remove the Inquisition from his hair, but I wasn't ready for that fight. One day we will have our revenge, I whispered in triple meaning. The wolf sighed in a pitiful breath, and the solitaire drew back his hand sheepishly. Not for a week, Lord Pef. Come visit me, for tea, the Inquisitor said in an inviting voice, and all thoughts of revenge were forgotten. In a second, I teleported into my shower and once again stepped on an invisible assassin sleeping on the floor. Out. I have a date with a pretty lady, I explained while ruthlessly kicking the lazy bum outside my bathroom. Revenge is better served cold. I heard a slight mutter before the door snapped shut. Whatever. I was getting laid today, and nobody would stand in my way. Minutes later, I stepped out in full naked glory, to search the wardrobe for something proper to wear. A captain uniform, perhaps? You're naked, a young girly voice observed while its owner blushed from head to toe. I know, because my eyes can see a bit in infrared now. As are most people after taking a shower, Sister Darcy. So brings you here? I answered while debating between a green or a blue shirt to go with my tunic. Green looks better, the girl said in a shy voice, and still not looking away. Well, I did have quite a Superman's body now, so it was understandable. I went with green, because it didn't matter anyway. Necrons had green eyes too, and my special friend would better be ready to rescue me soon. In a minute I was dressed in my finest rogue trader uniform, which did look great with a green shirt. Too bad I wouldn't wear it anywhere outside a fortified place surrounded by 100 Geller fields and 1,000 Astartes. You look dashing, Lord Pef. So, I was wondering. The girl trailed off in a soft whisper. I blinked and looked at the novice sister again. How old are you, Darcy? I asked in a stern tone. I'll be 15 soon, she replied in a dubious voice. And this is what you want from your life? I asked in the same manner. The girl shifted and tugged at her robes. I kissed you, and then you lived again. The Emperor granted me a miracle, and I was able to save you, Darcy announced in a strident tone, voice climbing too high towards the end. I blinked and sat on my bed, then patted the place beside me. You mean, Arcadia? I asked to make sure. Yes. You died and then I prayed and confessed my love and kissed you, and then you weren't dead anymore, the nascent saint admitted in a fearful voice, and hid her eyes away. Though luck, Pef. Now you have to own it. I poked the girl in her chest, then snubbed her nose. You barely have breasts, Darcy. Why don't you stay with Sister Celestine for a couple of years, and have her train you? Miracles are much easier with skill and training, right? The girl hugged me tightly and sobbed onto my green shirt. I will, my lord. If I am to become a conduit for the Emperor's grace, I should be stronger. And grow up a bit, especially around my chest. So I snapped my fingers and miracled the crying girl in Celestine's room. The saint should take care of this problem for a while. Then next second I stepped beside Lady Valane as she sat on a leather sofa and gently swirled tea in 2 cups. You're 5 minutes late, the woman observed in a glacial tone. Well, we didn't actually set a time for this date, I answered with a smile and sat beside the Lady Inquisitor. Fine. Menelaus was a joy to raise, so you better train him right. Now I want a daughter, like Janice, Valane demanded while sipping the hot tea with a questioning look. I frowned and thought about it, even engaging the mind implant for better accuracy. She didn't just want a daughter, but one like Janice, as a means to obtain more power in the Imperium. Rose herself had reached the top by obtaining the Emperor's approval with Janice and our plans. The chances to obtain a blank child were low anyways, and to be gifted a psycho/blank combo was even rarer by orders of magnitude. A century of constant fucking duty had provided me numerous children, yet only about 4,000 were blanks. Of those, barely a dozen has dual powers, and only Janice had beta-level powers from the start. Nowadays, after decades of training and being amplified by the Shadowlight artifact and the blessing of the Emperor, Janice was much more, possibly as strong as any Primarch, except Magnus. Her secular powers also matched her training and abilities, with the Adeptus Auroritas and the Silent Sisters under her command. "And what domain do you want for your daughter, my lady?" I wondered, curious, then sipped the exotic tea. "I don't know. Astra Telepathica maybe? Or at least the Templar Psychologist, maybe both?" the Inquisitor answered in a doubtful tone. I held my hand out and caressed her leg for comfort. "We'll need to have many children in that case. Maybe 5, maybe 100. Rose got lucky at 5th try." The woman bit her lips in deep thought. "I suppose it's why I have this young body again. The Emperor's currency is lives, and blanks matter even more," she concluded in a philosophical tone. She was a cold and calculating person, my Inquisitor Amias. But I also needed someone like her at my side, for diplomacy and other Ordo Xenos skills. "I suppose we could get married, once we reach Alivar," I muttered as I leaned closer for a kiss. Her eyes glinted with something predatory and hard, before she accepted my offer. "A wife, huh? I get to veto any concubine I don't agree with?" I just held her hands and kissed her knuckles. "Advice. My first wife Decima can veto, because she was born a Lancefire. My second wife Hannah as well, if she wants to. Serena and Day give good advice, but they aren't Lancefires by birth. You'll have to learn how things work in a rogue dynasty, my lady. In matters related to bloodlines, things are very complex." "I think I see it. Much like me having a say in Menelaus' concubines, because I love him that much," the woman mused in a faraway voice. She did get it, but not most of it. Love was important, but loyalty mattered even more. Verlaine had the Inquisition and the Emperor as her loyalties, but out in the fringe those mattered too little or not at all. When speaking with the voice of the Emperor and killing Inquisitors, one had to cling to something more palpable, like his family. Janice knew that, because she had lived among her clan for a dozen years. I even heard her approach the Emperor on my behalf, perhaps just enough to temper an excessive transhuman upgrade that would have ruined my life. "Let's go to bed," I demanded with a grin. Verlaine waved her fingers to fold her clothes and tea into her Nexus cube, then blinked at me with doe eyes. Worries could wait. I had more urgent matters right now. Days and weeks passed under constant demonic attacks, straining my nerves in the Geller fields, and yet the destination I've picked for our fleet seemed to recede farther away. Even worse, the onboard astropaths and navigators, even my librarians and Inquisitor Amias were having trouble establishing psychic contact with the outer universe. It appeared we were lost in space, only much lower under, in the hellish dimension called the warp. The only ones with a tiny sliver of knowledge of the events happening in the Materium were Sister Stern and her mentor, the solitaire Harlequin. And they weren't saying much. Sentences like "things are proceeding as planned and there's nothing to worry" kinda made me more worried. I also knew they weren't lying, just not telling me the whole truth, for some strange reason that would become obvious much later. Probably. So, I had to play dirty. Even if that meant abusing a trusted friend to get to the truth. "Canis, you like Darcy, right?" I asked my trusted wolf. The giant feral engine mewed in a dubious tone, making puppy eyes at me, but my will held firm. He wouldn't actually suffer from hugs and petting. An hour later, the young saint turned towards me with an ecstatic face and glowing golden eyes. "Thank you, Lord Pef," the teenage girl exclaimed in an endorphin-induced high. "What's going on with the Imperium? Why aren't we able to reach anyone?" I asked before she could recover from her trance. Her eyes glazed for a second, before returning to clear blue. "I'm not sure. Everyone is mostly fine, although they move very fast and their thoughts are exceedingly rapid. Like entire days pass in minutes. I nodded slowly while going over the new information. Of course, the universe outside hadn't sped up, it was us being trapped in a bubble of slow time. Possibly ever since we attacked Nurgle and his garden. Our Gela fields prevented the more obvious effects of accelerated entropy affecting us directly, which was good, for now. However, that also meant we haven't actually escaped, or not completely. Gods were probably still battling just outside the Black Lamance's hull, with the combined Allied fleet as prize or hostage in their reality-warping games. Was I a fool? I knew the heist wouldn't be that easy. Still, we were still alive, which meant a number of things. With a deep sigh, I leaned in my command chair and patted my necklace, delving into the sounding board. The range of the Xeno device was very limited when removed from the Pharos, but I could still reach the entire fleet. All ships, prepare for combat. We will commence normalization in 60 minutes, I commanded toward the minds of all the ship captains in the combined fleet. Naturally, the Lamenter and the Lancefire ships were used to such orders and immediately began sounding the battle station sirens. It took longer for the Indomitor's fleet and even longer for the Eldar, at least until their avatars confirmed the orders. A ghostly blue apparition manifested on the bridge, followed a second later by a burning red one. Ykani and Kane, luckily not in the flesh. I ignored the dead silent avatar of death, and instead focused on the god of war. I don't enjoy losing time, Kane. Nor I am interested in your great game, I muttered in a calm voice, perhaps with a tinge of irritation. A pair of orange glowing eyes focused on me for a minute. Your point is noted, human. But this fleet lacks the firepower to change the outcome of the battle. We need Aisha. And the fool as well. Kane answered directly into my mind. I almost sighed, but I grit my teeth and glanced at the pariah Harlequin observing the meeting from his perch on the ceiling. Selective cancelling of natural laws was probably not meant to be abused this way, but I admit I envied his skill anyways. Lord Segurak will arrive at the right moment. A god is always on time, especially if timing makes everything more exciting and amusing. The solitaire whispered in a careless voice. I think I saw a flash of brightness in the dead eyes of Ykani, but it was probably only a trick of light. Surely an avatar of Ned could not get aggravated by his fellow Eldar god, right? Definitely not. And I wasn't about to comment on his temper anyway. Canis yawned with his gigantic mouth, once again proving a perfect sense of social cues. Chaos Marines are not edible, my friend. Bite and chew, but don't eat them. Who knows what filth and disease they might carry? I advised the Fenrisian wolf while patting his nose. The wolf glanced at me like I was being too obvious. Still, his display broke the tension. Kane measured the wolf for a second, before turning towards me. Very well, Pef Lancefire. This location isn't ideal, but we are close enough to the domain's border. Just don't miss. The avatar said in a cold voice, and vanished. Cryptic again. But I was somewhat smarter now as well. I could infer what the god of war had in mind, and plan the battle accordingly. Ykani lingered for a few more seconds, dead eyes staring into my soul for some reason. Sorry, buddy. My afterlife is already spoken for, should I ever die again. Darcy stepped beside me and pointed at the glowing apparition. Apology accepted, Zeno. Now get ready to fight, if you want to live. The dead white eyes glowed blue for a millisecond, and then the avatar vanished. Ha ha. You tell the upstart, girl. You do have the most amazing companions, Pef Lancefire, Namorak exclaimed and flipped back to the deck and poked the young saint on her forehead. A blue rune flashed for a second before it sunk into her skin, leaving no visible mark. That better had been a blessing, Namorak. Or else, I muttered while ruffling Darcy's hair in praise. The girl was perhaps too brave for her own good, but then saints were not known for being rational. Quite the contrary. The Eldar Harlequin smiled mysteriously and jumped onto the ceiling again, outside the reach of Canis and his formidable jaws. Not telling, hee. The wolf growled and grinned at his future meal. Not yet, Canis. You know raw Xeno meat is bad for your stomach. Perhaps boiled or grilled over a small flame. I advised the wolf while ruffling his fur and scratching his ears. Woof. Canis answered in a convinced voice. Fried and stirred, not shaken. Good choice, my friend. But first, we had a god to kill, and the Eldar would be useful. Annoying and irritating like hell, but the Zeno was connected and I needed his patron to have a bigger chance for victory. Especially since Aisha would not show. Overlord Trazyn didn't carry around that giant tesseract vault just for show. The poor Eldar goddess had simply changed a prison for another, if one in which she wouldn't be tortured and forced to create cures to Nurgle's plagues. The Necron had need for a completely different cure, one that affected his entire race with the Necrodermis curse. I personally doubted that Aisha would be able to restore the Necrons to their former Necronta flesh, but perhaps a cure for the flare virus was possible. And from there, Trazyn would probably start massing entire armies of new loyal Necrons to his dynasty and wage wars on his enemy Necron dynasties, which wars would hopefully keep him busy for millennia. Win-win, at least for humanity. The preparation hour passed very fast afterwards, as troops and pilots prepared to sortie in their vehicles and starfighters, weapon batteries and tubes were readied and prayers and logic rituals were chanted by our tech priests and engineers. And then, the Black Lament disengaged the warp engines and we appeared again in the warp and all hell broke loose. A brightly golden figure flashed by and pierced through a tentacled greater demon, leaving only shredded entrails still pulled behind by its silver hands. For once, I didn't need a lore expert to identify this historic figure. Ferrus Manus might be dead in the flesh, but his spirit was not. Just like Sanguinius, the Golden Angel was kicking ass in the warp without a problem. I flicked Polaris Albedalac beside him, and together with the Side Titan the Spirit Primarch minced the Nurgle's unclean one into tiny bits of gore and nightmare. Ykani and Kane took the brunt of the fight to Nurgle, striking with their glowing swords as Gork and the Legion of the Damned took a step back to draw their breaths and recover for a minute. Primarchs Khan and L. Johnson followed a minute later, with giant white wings acting as propulsion and shields. They weren't quite the match for Nurgle, but I also helped with short bursts from the Blackstone Fortress beam. Far in the distance, trillions of Tyranids were still battling hordes of Nurgleite demons, their numbers and silence giving them an edge against the Immaterium creatures. Thousands of distorted ships and space hulks kept arriving to disgorge corrupted space marines and demon engines of all sizes, from small rapiers with spines and mouths to chaos knights and titans inhabited by demons. Their pilots fused into their seats in grotesque distortions of flesh and machine. Our batteries fired without pause, exploding enemies by the millions while I deployed the troops wherever they'd be useful. Lamenters and Silent Sisters formed the second line, protecting our larger vehicles with their Nalzoras and shields, while macro cannons and lance batteries fired on the Chaos ships in continuous salvos. I had a minor advantage with my Tesseract, punishing the traitors when bunching up too much, with Nova mines or melter bombs. For an hour, the fight went well, and we even pushed the enemy back. But unlike the Legion of the Damned, our munitions were not infinite. Bolters and missiles started to get scarce then ran out. Torpedoes and shells lasted longer, while plasma and lasers would still fire as long we had power. It was not an ideal battleground though, not against a nearly infinite enemy force that was also able to reform and resurrect in the presence of their god, Nurgle. I glanced in the nearly empty inventory of the Tesseract for my final options, the Omega Pariahs and my own Psi Titan. Somehow, I didn't feel it would be enough though. The Dame Chaos God didn't even seem tired and more minions kept coming despite my best efforts. Sometimes, divine intervention should not delay this long. I muttered mostly to myself. Oh? Is it the right time already? An alien voice asked from the ceiling. I glanced at the patch-job Joker with a dour face. Even if Segorak arrived right now, he still wouldn't be enough. My lord, the Emperor protects, Darcy announced in a proud voice. I did not curse or sigh. The girl was a nun, so I expected religious zeal from her. Instead, I fired the Immaterium beam again, chasing the impact tracer after Nurgle as the jolly creature dodged and evaded multiple demigods with ease, and kept it going until I began hurting. My vision began to blur, and pain filled my lungs. I kept firing, just as Ykani chopped off a leg from Nurgle and slowed it down. Became fire in my lungs, and I closed my eyes to focus better. Tracking Nurgle with the Tesseract was easier than via the holographic display, and the Blackstone Fortress's machine spirit constant stream of canticles and vector projections faded in the background. Saint Celestine failed to parry a thorny spike, and was impaled through the stomach, her wings shattering like glass. Albedalak was blown apart by a mighty claw, only for a blue force field to cover the cockpit. I forced myself to push through the pain and recover Stern and Albesalam, but Sister Celestine exploded into white feathers before I could reach her. Ferrus Manus was bitten in half and melted into acid, or perhaps wine. The warp was always trippy that way, but today was especially strange. The universe burned around and inside me, and everything lit up in glowing golden light. Then time itself stopped, the implant's chronometers turning 1,000,000,000 times too slow. Yet even in slow time, a stupid laughter filled my ears as a pillar of light split the warp. The cavalry had arrived. With a gentle shift, the golden pillar spread out like a fog clearing over a mountain valley, and in fact transmuting the warp itself into a solid area of hope and dreams. Acid clouds and fleshy mountains transformed into white glowing mountains with castles and walls all around us, dotted with angelic figures manning turrets and weapons sparkling with holy sigils. A host of angels and seraphs, with giant wings and fiery swords converged on the Chaos God, led by a blinding figure in a golden armor. "The Emperor of Mankind is here, Lord Pef," Darcy announced in a reverent tone. Well, I could see that for myself, even with my eyes closed. And the Emperor had also dragged his entire warp domain along, radically changing the battlefield and returning the fight to a home advantage. Lord Segorak made this possible, just so you know, human. The solitaire Harlequin added with a gleeful snort, just as the Emperor struck with his own burning sword at Nurgle. I cut off the immaterium beam before I passed out, then opened my eyes to see the fight directly. Sadly, it was a blur of sparks and claws, even in the nearly frozen temporal horizon of this new domain. To no one's surprise, the Orc god Gork didn't stick around to find out the winner, and sped away while clutching the head of Mork under one arm and a trove of gems and gold under another. Orcs will probably lose half of their strength for the next millennia, Inquisitor Emmaus concluded while watching the events. That was possibly good then. Weaker orcs would allow humanity some respite and time to recover, or better said focus on the more pressing enemies like the Tyranids. I didn't have time to muse too long on that problem though, as Nurgle shattered into 1,000 bits and scattered all over the warp, with Primarchs and Avatars chasing after individual bits to end them once and for all. I resumed firing the Black Lament's beam as soon as the Emperor cleared the line of fire, striking 100 fragments of the former Chaos God and annihilating them. Funnily enough, most of the escaping fragments were retreating towards the infested garden, where they were soon attacked by the ravenous Tyrannid fleets. I wasn't going to chase them into that abattoir, especially as the Tyrannid seemed to have a field day gorging themselves on the small bleeding Nurgle shards, and his demons. The demons themselves seemed suddenly much weaker, or at least here inside the afterlife domain of the Emperor. The battlefield cleanup took mere minutes, with untold numbers of warp angels and the immortal Astartes of the Legion of the Damned killing billions of demons with ease. Soon, I began collecting the deployed troops and vehicles, returning them into hangars and depots just as tech priests began reconsecrating their holy engines and covering the machines and armor in oil and prayers. The Tesseract vision offered me the privilege of observing this universe's powers gathering for an ad hoc meeting in a white stone spire of the afterlife. The Eldar god of pranks, Segorak himself was there as well, his feet carelessly laid on the marbly table and one hand draped lazily over the arm of his chair. Everyone else, from Primarchs to Avatars and Phoenix Lords, were struggling to ignore the obnoxious god and his antics. "Why is your lord so smug?" I wondered with a glance at the usual suspect. Namorak chuckled and glided beside me, then leaned over to poke at the hololith screen. A galactic map appeared at his touch, with a screaming vortex circled in blue by an Eldar rune. "Lord Segorak has closed this warp vortex just now, using the Talisman of Vul. You realize what this means?" the Eldar Harlequin asked in a teasing voice. I admit, galactic politics and the games the gods played among themselves were still way above my head. I could deduce some of the implications though. Something about a larger godly domain, I suspect? I asked with a glance at the Ordo Xenos expert. Lady Valane shook her head slightly, so I possibly missed the point. "Perhaps it is better if you avoid galactic politics, Pef Lancefire. Anyways, you will be called upon soon. Try not to die." Namorak advised me with a snicker, then jumped away and vanished in midair. The Tesseract tracked the solitaire as he reappeared beside Sister Stern in her room. Damn cheater. He didn't even have a Tesseract, yet he was able to do most of my tricks anyways. I just patted Canis on his head, secure in his complete friendship and support. You think I'll get a medal? I asked him without much hope. The wolf turned to measure me for a minute, then sniffed in dismissal. Yeah, my thoughts exactly, buddy. I kept watch over the glowing avatar of the Emperor as a familiar map of swirling circles was produced and discussed among the winners of the Garden War, with new symbols and runes appearing over the map as each participant pointed a finger towards it. Hours later, the focus of the conference changed towards the eastern fringe, and I became suddenly a lot more interested. Certain runes were familiar to me already, like those for the Celestial Orrery on planet Thanatos, or the Wyamga monolith, and new runes marked the Ultramar space, and my own kingdom at Elivar. Further south, the tower marked as well, as were the Ghoul stars to the north. The crown world Geddon of the Necron Nihilake dynasty featured 3 different runes for some reason, and Solemnus featured both a Necron glyph and an Eldar rune. It didn't take a genius to figure out they were partitioning spheres of influence and galactic borders, as well as quarantine zones and important artifacts. I wonder what are they saying about the Lancefire lands? I muttered with concern towards my future wife. I guess you'll find, she began saying when I was suddenly yanked away from my chair and displaced right into the map room. Hello there, I quipped in a jovial tone. Nobody bothered to answer me, although Primarch Khan blinked and looked away. So you're going to send your soulless hammer to solve such a delicate problem? Kane asked with a derisive tone, and pointed at a glowing green rune marking Solemnus and the lands of Trazyn the Infinite, Necron Overlord and Jailer of Aisha. That was rather discriminatory though. And I was not a hammer. Perhaps I wasn't the most delicate of men, but I never wanted to be one. My son has his flaws, but he gets results. Isn't that right, Avatar of Ned? The Emperor asked the other divine being. Again, the god of the dead fixed his white orbs on me, and measured me for a long minute. Then he turned and nodded towards the Emperor, with some secret message passing between them, and above my head. Is this about Trazyn? I asked to make sure. Everyone in the room just stared at me in silence, which became quite awkward after a minute. Perhaps silence was golden? Things have changed in the past 90 years, my son. And with the hive mind gaining a share of Nurgle's domain in the warp, we think it would be good if Aisha was freed and started aiding the Alliance. Lord Kane is quite furious at the delay. The Emperor spoke in a soft and rational voice, although his holy aura and appearance as a divine avatar kinda broke the setting a little. I could imagine changes had happened out in the real over 90 years. That was 4 generations and unknowable discoveries and social upheavals, especially with the Emperor returned to life. Plus the consequences of my own actions before that, like spreading blank genes and new technologies. And killing a few chaos gods. Even worse, the Tyrannid hive mind now had a domain in the warp. Genostealers would spread like wildfire in that event. Space hulks could be directed to emerge anywhere in the galaxy and infest or attack more human worlds, perhaps even Eldar or Tau. Free Aisha. Sure, I'll do it, I answered after considering the situation for a minute. We lost 3,000 ships and billions of warriors trying to do that, human. A certain Phoenix Lord interjected in obvious scorn. I blinked and turned towards the fuming Eldar woman. They tried a military solution? Against Trazyn. How stupid could these people be? Don't you have farseers? Surely they could predict the outcome of an assault, right? I wondered in a surprised voice. I think Segurak smirked at that, while Primarch Johnson scowled profoundly. The odds get better if you are present, my son. Just let us know what aid you need from us. We do have substantial forces and armies, among ourselves. The Emperor explained with a gentle smile. Maybe. The white might not have been his teeth, it was hard to say with all that glowing light. The voice was pleasant though. I shrugged and waved my hand to dismiss the offer of more troops or ships. I alone will be enough. Again, a dozen pair of eyes stared at me in scorn or perhaps disbelief. Segurak tapped his forehead for some strange reason, and I was expelled from the conference without more comments. What did I do? Back on board the Black Lament I had new guest. Uninvited but welcome, Ferrus Manus stood in his angel form on my bridge, silver hands sparkling with the immaterial equivalent of necrodermis. "Can you talk?" I asked, a bit curious. Obviously, the Emperor considered my mission important enough to deploy a heavy weapon as backup. Ferrus Manus certainly qualified as such. Deadeyes stared at me without an answer. Well, I didn't expect him to speak, to be fair. It wasn't even the first time I have encountered a spirit primarch. "Don't worry, my friend. We're going to see a goddess and have her restore you back to life," I explained in a patient tone, and gestured towards the plasteel block normally reserved for an Astartes bodyguard. Like Ludvius. And speaking of my old friend, it was probably too long since I visited Meridian. I could stop there on my way, and check on Ludvius. "My lord, he is a primarch. In the same room with us," Darcy exclaimed in a reverent voice. I sighed inward at her fangirly way. "You can touch him if you want. Just don't stick your hands in his mouth," I answered with a snort, and Canis snorted in tandem. Darcy watched the angel sit on his pedestal and stare blankly at the viewing screen, her eyes wide in awe and hands trembling with excitement. "You do have the most curious friends, Pef Lancefire," a Xena voice observed from the door. I turned to nod towards Menmarak and his escort, Sister Stern. "I'm certain you've met Phoenix Lords yourself. Ferrus Manus is quite similar to your race's demigods." The solitaire raised a finger to comment, then lowered it sheepishly. "I guess they would seem similar to a human. Warrior aspects with dedicated followers," he admitted with a shrug. I began to nod when the warp shifted, white clouds and pearly gates evaporating all around. The conference ended, or perhaps moved someplace different. The Eldar fleet departed without any word, splitting into a dozen smaller fleets, each diving into different warp currents. I guess they didn't feel like saying goodbye, or even good luck. "I can navigate the Black Lament, Lord Pef. Just name a destination," the Demonofuge proposed with a kind voice. Should I have been surprised at her new talent? She was in fact a new empress of mankind, created in similar manner to the Emperor himself. Sure, the Emperor was given his powers by 1,000 of shamans pooling their souls into a single entity in ancient times, but the Battle Sister also had 700 souls imbued into the fabric of her existence. A new perpetual, able to resurrect or destroy legions of demons with ease. And now, Stern was my new companion and concubine. I surely lucked out with her, even if she came with an Eldar Harlequin in tow. For a solitaire, that guy was amazingly sociable. Then again, I did have thousands of blanks and pariahs as companions, lamenters and silent sisters with the same Nalora as he had. There wasn't much tolerance in the galaxy for people like us, especially not among the Eldar. "Hive World Meridian," I declared while sending orders to the ships via the manifold circuit, and calling the fleet to form up with the Blackstone Fortress. The Alpha Psyker smiled at me and vanished in a purple flash, to reappear in the navigator quarters. Soon enough, we proceeded on our journey, with the new navigator pathing our way through the nebulous warp currents. Just like Janice, Sister Stern did not need a third eye to steer the ship through the warp. Anyways, I was quite busy during the journey with repairs and new STC blueprints. I might have accidentally acquired 100 data stacks filled with archaeotech data from Mars and Jupiter, and entire vaults of ancient machinery which I rescued from their inevitable destruction at the hands of the Chaos, Orc, Dark Eldar and Necron invaders. Sure, eventually the crisis was also solved and the Sol system didn't get destroyed, but nobody could say it hadn't been close. I even mapped a part of the Noctis labyrinth on Mars, just to have something of value to trade to my special friend. I was a rogue trader by birth, wasn't I? To my right, the dead Primarch seemed to approve, as he observed my efforts on the STC templates upgrades with a stone-faced expression. Sadly, the vast majority of the valuable templates refused to load at all on the cogitator, locked under complicated algorithms and anathema class overrides, and the few that did open were horribly defaced or decayed. The tech priesthood of Mars guarded their secrets well, even innocuous technology like solar-powered rechargers or Vox transmitters. Of course, I did have working templates already stored from different forged worlds, and even some Xeno-based blueprints from the Tower and other technological races. I could compare and then design a missing piece with a similar function, even if it wasn't an ideal device. Some efficiency or reliability would be lost through my meddling, But then it wasn't all bad. If the result was different enough to warrant a separate pattern name for this solar charger, then I could trade the new pattern without worry. Ferrous Pattern Solar Charger. Discovered in an ancient facility by trader Lancefire. Tech priests and engineers are advised to use with caution, due to age degradation. I wrote as a final note. Then I saved the blueprint and reached for my recaf mug, only to find an angel hand hovering over the mug. "You want some CF, my friend?" I asked in surprise. The angel turned to stare at me like I was silly. Possibly not his point though. "You don't like the name? I thought you'd be honored," I deduced with my genius brain. That wasn't it though. The Primarch's left hand morphed into a cogitator port and he simply plugged himself in, then reopened the template to look over it with a curiously interested look on his statue face. No wonder the Iron Hand Astartes all had a knack for using bionic limbs and repairing their own weapons or armor. It was genetic. In mere minutes, the angel repaired the damaged STC template, then began upgrading it with subtle shifts in placement and materials, replacing gold connectors with platinum or enlarging some capacitor banks while reducing another. When he was finished, he added a few steel pins along the spine, and the template folded into a much smaller size, more compact and protected by the outer casing. Then the diagrams unfolded once more, and the text changed to remove the warranty warning. I patted his back in excitement, since this new device would be actually valuable, even for my own troops when deployed in the field. Perhaps as backup sources for the tarantula turrets as well, even those mounted on the hull of spaceships. Every solar system had a sun, after all. Plenty of energy to collect. "You're pretty bright, for a dead guy." The angel turned and nodded towards me with a stony face. "Is it dinner time already?" a certain lazy assassin asked from under the bed. And no, I wasn't cruel to Vadrax. He just preferred not being stepped on, it seemed. Perhaps being kicked by accident, sometimes. "Last meal together, Vadrax. We'll arrive at Meridian sometime tomorrow, and you'll resume the escort mission on Lady Cassandra?" I explained as I raised and stretched my back, working out kinks induced by hours of focused effort. Useless effort as well, considering what the Angel Primarch had just proven. Still, I didn't envy his dead form. And on that note, a giant angel escorting me around would raise eyebrows, perhaps even start some sort of zealot rage among the Imperial citizens. The crew of the Black Lament wasn't the type to get overly excited over a Primarch, especially not ours. The Battle Sisters and some tech priests were still impressed, but not to the degree normal Hive citizens would be. As Vadrax crawled out and stretched as well, I began taking out various power armors and even dreadnought suits to compare them with the size of the Angel. Too small though. "Wait, are you trying to fit the Angel into a suit of armor? He is more durable than a cruiser," the Calexis assassin exclaimed with a laugh. Ferrus Manus turned towards me and nodded, agreeing with Vadrax's point. "Nothing like that. But he is too obvious and might cause popular revolts or upheavals wherever we go. Primarchs are myths among the populace," I explained patiently as I extracted the golden armor once worn by poor brother Archeo at Forge Shenlong. The same place where I first killed a Primarch, and then an Inquisitor. Good old days, right? Only this time, instead of stopping a delusional Astartes who dressed as a Primarch, I was dressing a Primarch to look like a delusional Astartes. "And is he going to walk or fight in that armor? He doesn't have a black carapace," the assassin countered with a pretty logical argument. But he was asleep during the latest developments. Ferrus Manus simply became a vaporous cloud and moved inside the armor, then plugged himself in the armor's control circuits with his Necrodermis plug. A second later, he found the wing ports and stretched his wings out through the flaps, and hovered in midair with a satisfied face. "You were saying?" I asked rhetorically while retrieving and mounting the helmet over the armor. "Nobody will suspect a thing. Until he has to speak, I guess," Vadrax muttered in a lower tone. "The armor has a vox box. You were saying?" the angel asked with a metallic voice. I glanced at the assassin and we both sighed. Primarchs were pure bullshit.